Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining today's Great Boulder Resources Q&A webinar. My name is Lucas Robinson from Investor Relations Consultancy, Corporate Storytime. Great Boulder is a mineral exploration company with a portfolio of highly prospective gold and base metal assets in Western Australia. The company's core focus is the Sidewell Gold Project at Meekatharra in the Murchison Goldfield, where exploration is to find a mineral resource of 668,000 ounces of gold at 2.8 grams per tonne. I'm pleased to have Great Boulder's Managing Director Andrew Paterson with me today for this interactive session. This webinar will be a Q&A format throughout, so there won't be any formal presentation. With that, let's get started. Andrew, welcome. Do you wish to make any general comments before we dive into the questions?
Yeah, thank you, Lucas, and thank you to Corporate Storytime for setting this up at short notice. And also want to acknowledge one of our shareholders who wrote to me during the week with a very polite email just highlighting his concerns and some of the feedback to things that were conversations that were happening online. And and this webinar is a direct response to that email. So the key thing is, well, firstly, I don't read the online blogs, so I'm not necessarily aware of what's going on there. I have better things to do, and that's not an insult to the blogs. It's just that we're really busy here. But secondly, if you do have any questions, just send us an email is actually the best way to get hold of me. And we'll always respond to a politely worded email. I do have had in the past people email with general abuse, and I certainly won't engage with that. But if you've got any questions and you're wondering what's going on, send us an email and I will always endeavour to reply. So thank you. I'm not going to name names, but thank you to that shareholder and I appreciate it. Now, secondly, moving on, just some general discussion about the board, and knowing that some of this concern has been specific to questions regarding board remuneration in the notice of meeting. And that's fair. I'm happy to talk about any of that stuff. So the board generally, obviously, I'm the Managing Director. Greg Hall is the Chairman. Melanie Layton and Karen O'Neill, non-exec directors. It's actually a really solid board and obviously geologically dominant, which is relevant for our current situation as a dedicated explorer and a kind of high-performing exploration company. But this board are by no means a lifestyle business. I mean, these non-execs, I actually make them work pretty hard for their non-exec fees. And I know, there may be, people may be under the impression that non-execs just turn up for a free lunch, and that's actually not true. Certainly not in our case. They all work pretty hard and they all have input into announcements and strategy and decisions going forward all the time. So, the other thing is the board mix is really good. So we've got obviously 50-50 gender balance, and that's not deliberate. We've got Greg, who's a globally experienced explorationist and mineral systems guy leading the company. And Greg and I really take care to set a positive culture within the organisation. And then we're backed up by Karen with her commercial nous and Melanie Layton, who's got different exploration experience. And the other thing to note about the board is that we don't always agree with each other. So we have some pretty good conversations at board level to make the best decisions that we can. And that's the way a good board operates. So when we go into a board meeting, we all leave our egos outside the door and we decide, we argue amongst ourselves if required, make the best decisions possible. So now moving on briefly to the resolutions at the AGM. Now, the first one is mine, that's Managing Director Performance Rights. I can see that that's contentious. The reason for putting it in there is that my current performance rights scheme expires on the 3rd of December, and this is intended to replace it starting on the 4th of December, so it's a direct replacement for something that's already in existence. The share price has changed, and that just reflects the fact that unfortunately the current share price has changed. The trigger points are 100, 200 and 300% of our current value. So obviously, if I was to get all of those at our current shares on issue, we would be about $180 million company, and I think everyone would be pretty happy. Now, that's just stating that as a fact, and people can make up their own mind about whether they think that's fair or not, whether they think I'm working hard enough, is an individual choice. The other thing to note is that although the share trigger prices have changed, the value of each stage is exactly the same as it was before. So the dollar value has not changed. Now, the other thing is the director options packages, which is for the 3 non-execs. For Greg and Mel, they're just replacing options that expired over a year ago. So at the moment, they don't have any. This is pretty standard. We generally try and incentivise the non-execs with options all the way through. Ideally, the share price goes up, they exercise those options, we get the money into the business and drill more holes, find more gold. So, that's a good way to keep people pointed in the right direction and to demonstrate that the whole board is focused on progressing the company. The ones with Karen are a little more complicated because she only joined the board 2 years ago. So she still does have some options which are exercisable at 14 cents. So I actually requested the board to consider giving Karen the same package as Greg and Mel. So they're all on the same footing and on the same timeline. So if there's any criticism, that should be directed at me and certainly not at Karen. And really, that's all I wanted to say in the intro. I think it's a great board. Obviously, think it's a bloody good company. And we're all really strongly focused on pushing forward. So I'll now hand back to Lucas to go through the Q&A section.
Thank you for that overview, Andrew, and it probably answers one or two of the questions that we've received in advance. So I'll move to the first question. Some shareholders believe that the way to unlock value in the company is by way of M&A activity. Does the company have directors on the board with M&A experience, and is Great Boulder considering these strategies?
Yes, and that's a really good question, very relevant. And the board actually consider this all the time. So we had a little strategy workshop earlier in the year when we specifically considered M&A versus organic growth. So we looked at all the opportunities that we could see for realistic M&A in our region and statewide. Not so much overseas. The board is not focused on overseas opportunities at the moment. And ultimately, we tossed everything back and forward, and we decided that the best bang for our buck, as we saw it at that point, is organic growth, and that has not changed. So the reason for that decision is simply the fact that we've got such a good project at Sidewell. We've got so many targets there that organic growth is kind of a no-brainer because, to give an example, in our region, the other players are Mika Metals, Ora Gold, Odyssey Gold, Monument Mining, and West Gold, plus a bunch of other greenfields explorers. Now, Mika have gone down their own path. Ora Gold are off the table. West Gold are the predator. We're trying to keep them at bay for the time being. I don't think there's an issue there. Monument Mining, I actually don't really know what they're doing. We have tried to engage with them, but we haven't had any feedback. We haven't spoken to them for a couple of years, so that's been a while. And lastly, Odyssey, and Odyssey, they're doing their own thing. They're drilling at the moment. It's a well-run organisation. They've got a good resource there, but I kind of see that's not an obvious fit for Great Boulder, given where we are today. All of those companies, more or less, perhaps excepting Mika Metals, we're all undervalued. And so demonstrating value through the drill bit is the best path forward. Now, sorry, I've digressed a bit. The other question was about whether we have M&A experience. Certainly, Greg's been through a few phases of M&A. My history back in the day with Atlas Iron, we did a lot of M&A activity, gobbling up junior companies, which was, great fun being the aggressor. And we had quite a well-oiled process for determining opportunities and deciding whether to progress with them or not. So certainly Greg and I have got that experience. I'm sure Mel and Karen have similar experience on their CV, but I actually haven't asked them that question, so I can't answer that on their behalf.
Thank you, Andrew. Following with the next question, with the current modest share price and cash position, will you now consider debt financing for a mine development at Sidewell rather than further share dilution?
No. And the only reason for that is to take on debt. It would be irresponsible of us to take on debt finance until such point that we had income to pay debt repayments. We've considered other financing opportunities. There are things like royalties, ATM facilities, which is sort of a deferred equity style arrangement anyway. ATM means at the market, which is that you can issue shares progressively during the year in small bunches. We've considered cornerstone investors, and that's still something that might make sense as long as it's not viewed as a gorilla in the room, Westgold style. So yeah, we've looked at all opportunities, but debt is certainly not something that makes sense at the moment.
Pretty clear then. Do you consider there is a realistic possibility Great Boulder can transition from an explorer to a producer in the future? And if so, what sort of timeline are you looking at?
Yeah, that's also a very good and very topical question. So the answer is yes. Now, as most people probably know, I have a production background, so I'm comfortable in a mining environment, but we would need to put more mining skills on the board. Specifically, it would be obvious to introduce a mining engineer and someone with mine building experience on the board, and we'll certainly consider that in due course. And that would be completely appropriate as we aim to evolve from an explorer to developer to producer. In terms of timeline, I'm less clear about this in my own mind about how long this might take, but we generally sort of talk about a kind of a 2-year time frame, which is a typical Western Australian approvals process. Having said that, we have already done some early stage work on that. So obviously we've got a mining lease application in progress. We aim to put on 2 more next year, one for Mulga Bill, one for Saltbush, at least 2. We have a mining agreement negotiation on foot with the traditional owners, and the intention is to establish a mining agreement that fits all future mining leases, such that any other applications that we lodge can go straight through to the mines department with an agreement in place to speed things up. Beyond that, though, in the approvals process, you've got things like flora fauna surveys, and we've already done some work on that. We'll do more work. The next kind of milestone for doing that is autumn next year. We've done initial flora surveys in particular to check that there's no kind of priority species that we need to watch out for, so that's fine. And we'll continue that process. And then, of course, scoping and feasibility studies for a decision to mine, and we're doing a lot of the preparatory work for that as well in terms of infill drilling, metallurgy studies, which are underway at the moment. And then as we get further down the track, we'll look at things like geotechnical and groundwater studies. So all of these things are in the pipeline, and we intend to progress each of them progressively in the background. We don't tend to talk about a lot of this stuff, but it's all happening, such that when we get close to making a decision, it doesn't take too long. So it's a little bit vague, but that's the nature of the beast in Western Australia.
Thanks, Andrew. The next question is, are you looking at completing an infill campaign to prove up Ironbark in order to underpin a PFS development study looking at a mining scenario at that deposit?
No, because we've already done it. So if you look at the resource for Ironbark, it's already 80% indicated, so there's no need to do any more drilling there. And so no, we don't need to. We can do the study now.
a follow-up question. When do you expect approval for the mining
Oh,
application?
well, so the timeline I'm working towards with the TO group is to have an agreement in place with them by middle of next year. So, June 30 would be good. These conversations do take a while, and it's actually taken us a fair while to get this far, but that's my goal that I'm pushing towards. Once that mining agreement's signed and then we register it with the government, then there shouldn't be any other impediments to getting the mining lease granted shortly after that. So yeah, that's kind of the timeline. Saltbush, because it's more discreet, similar to Ironbark, we should be able to put a mining lease application over there soon. Any day really, because we kind of know how big it is. Mulga Bill is a bit more uncertain because at the moment we've drilled out half of it, and there's maybe another K to a K and a half further north, and we just don't want to truncate that with a mining lease in the wrong place. So we need to be careful of that and do a bit more work at Mulga Bill to figure out quite how big it is before we put a mining lease there. And obviously, the other thing with mining lease applications is within the footprint, you need to think about where you're going to put your waste dump, where's your infrastructure going, where would you put the office? You don't want to put the office within the blast radius, or you keep having to evacuate it every time you fire a shot. Just basic things like that. All the stuff that we need to think about, and we need some consulting skills to look at that sort of stuff before we lodge these applications. It's not a big deal, it's just part of the process.
This is a good one. What are your hopes for the Great Boulder share price in the next 3 months, 1 year, and 3 years' time?
Obviously, I'm optimistic. You can't be an exploration geo without being an optimist. But really, I do think Great Boulder stands out from the pack. And I always say this, so you've heard me say it before, but we're in such a good position with this project. We've got targets now we could drill for 2 years, no problem at all. We've debottlenecked everything. We've done heritage work. We've got relationships with contractors in, rigs on site. Got people on the team. So I think we're really well positioned. And then the other aspect is not only are we ready to go, I think the market is ready to go, and the gold price is just getting better. I think it broke 3 all-time highs just in the last 5 days. It's just astonishing. And I've been doing this for over 30 years now, and I don't remember a market like this before. So the gold producers are printing money, and some of them are still undervalued relative to the gold price, and the explorers are really lagging behind. So that at some point they're going to take a big leap forward. And I don't know whether it'll happen in the rest of this year, but I think 2025 is going to be a really exciting time, and I'm really looking forward to it.
Excellent. Sort of an adjunct to that question, do members of the board consider the idea of buying shares on market now would seem to be a good time to buy?
Yeah, absolutely. It is, and I can't speak for the others, but I bought a house last year, so I'm kind of feeling the pinch. I actually don't have a lot of spare cash between you and me. Otherwise I would. Yeah, so definitely. I have obviously bought shares on market at various times in the past. It's just, yeah, speak to my bank.
I know the feeling. Have you got a general comment on how mining I suppose you have covered the mining applications question, so I'll skip to another question. In regards to a new mineral resource estimate, what sort of expectations can you guide shareholders towards in terms of the quantum?
I have to be very careful about how I answer this in terms of continuous disclosure. So we will be drilling. We're drilling right now at Saltbush, so we're doing the drill out there just to get it up to resource stage. So it'll be the first resource at Saltbush. We will then go back and do more drilling at Mulga Bill North, and we'll start to bring Mulga Bill North into resource. There's actually so much more drilling at Mulga Bill, just to the sheer size of that Mulga Bill North area, that we don't know exactly how many meters that's going to require at this stage. So obviously what we see, you know, we're looking at a million ounce potential. We're now looking beyond that, you know, to think, well, you know, in 1 to 2 years, can we achieve 1.5 million ounces? And we're starting to talk about that in the general sense as a kind of project aspiration, an aspirational target. And it's not an exploration target because that's a defined JORC term, so I'll steer away from that at the moment. Yeah, timing is a bit up in the air. We will do incremental updates to the resource so we can keep doing some of this early stage economic work. The exact timing of when we go public with that and how big it is remains to be seen, and I'd prefer not to kind of put that out there in this forum.
Sure. I think this will probably be the last question unless we have something come in late on the text line. So there is a member of the audience that's quite interested in the idea of mining scenario at Ironbark. So just further to that, what are you doing in terms of groundwork to start mining at Ironbark, if you are doing any at all, or are you going to wait until final approval before doing that sort of preparative work?
No, so we're not doing anything at the moment, but Ironbark's actually really straightforward. The ore there, in some areas, it's actually at surface, so you'd be digging ore from day one, and it would be a very simple truck and shovel operation. So you'd be looking at a pit somewhere around 500 or 600 meters long, reasonable sized pit, assuming that you can take out kind of 80–90% of the resource, or maybe even the whole resource with such a good gold price. And I don't know, and you know, don't pin me on that because I'm not talking about ore reserves or anything, but it's Ironbark is just a really simple operation to mine, and it's the sort of thing that's happening every day around the goldfields. Steeply dipping, tabular ore body, you're mining across the pit from waste to ore to waste. It's really straightforward. There's nothing complicated there.
Okay. Well, I did say last question, but there has just been a question in relation to the runway with current cash. You know, how many quarters, given the exploration activity, do you think you know that the company has in the, you know, for cash at the bank?
Yep. Yeah, so you know, we closed 30 June just under 3 mil, then we got about $500,000 in, 550 back in an R&D rebate. That set us up pretty well. We're always considering opportunities to push that out. So yeah, we've been busy. I won't make any statements about when we're going to raise capital. I'm very conscious of the share price and not blowing up the register. So yeah, that's all I'll say at this stage.
Okay. Thank you, Andrew. I think we'll wrap it up. That appears to cover the majority of our questions today. Thank you very much for the update, and we look forward to watching on with interest for Great Boulder's progress over the coming months. I wish to thank all of the attendees for your attendance, and this concludes our webinar for the day. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you. Thanks, mate. And yeah, thanks for everyone for listening in. Appreciate it.